Welcome back, everybody. We have a repeat offender back on the podcast. Someone I love talking to, love listening to because well, he's a great writer, has great insights on politics and history and the philosophy of conservatism, what it means, and somebody I've always liked to listen to and read. Jonah Goldberg. Jonah, thanks for being on.
Hey, it's great to be back.
So we were just chatting it up last time. It's been actually a while. Doesn't seem that way, but it's been a while since last time we talked. And you were recalling that last time we had our podcast. I think we cross posted on each of ours. And your podcast is still the Remnant, or do you have others? You have so many things going on, but it's the Remnant. I think is the main.
Yeah.
And we cross posted that great conversation on that one. But then I went into surgery and went blind. So it was your fault. That's all
I felt guilty. I couldn't figure out why I was to blame, but I come from a long line of Goldbergs who feel guilty about things they shouldn't, and so I felt bad about how, like, you tweeted that thing about how you are going into surgery and going off grid, and like right afterwards, and I was like, holy crap! So glad you're better.
So speaking of Jews supposing who are supposed to feel guilty, let's get serious for a second here. You've written a lot about this. You've been pretty angry about this. I've been pretty angry about this. I've been more perplexed than anything. It's just the absurd reaction to the October 7th attacks by Hamas against Israeli civilians. The absurd reaction on the campus left, the left in general. I've talked about this at events a lot, and we're constantly talking to constituents and folks, and I haven't come up with a good answer about what it means. Usually, I'm able to analyze something and say, okay, these are the undercurrents. These are the all the threads that are being woven together to create this outcome that is perplexing us. I can't figure this one out because here's the thing. If my team does something really stupid, I tend not to cheer for it. Really, I definitely don't cheer for it louder than I otherwise would have. All right. Now, some Republicans do. I'm not one of them. Okay. Like, so some Republicans, January 6th happens. It's like, I'm not one of them. And so when my team does something bad, I at the very least, I kind of do the Homer Simpson back into the bushes meme.
Right.
At the very least, that is not what's happening. That is not what's happening here with the, even pro-Palestine, whether they're pro-Palestine or sympathize or sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. They have gone all out on Jews are evil, Jews are bad, river to the sea, all of it. I mean, why?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think if we're going to talk about teams, I think it is important to note that on the left, there are a lot of teams, but there are two broad ones in this context. And one is this sort of conventional liberal Democrat, New Deal, Truman, big great society kind of Democrat, which Biden thinks he's part of. And they haven't been that bad. I mean, if you look at the statements from Nancy Pelosi and Jeffries and those guys, given what a big chunk of their base wants them to say, it's actually been, grading on a curve, kind of heroic somewhat.
Yeah.
The other part of it, though, is that there has been, and Nate Silver was making this point recently, part of it, just as a pure punditry thing, is there have been these, call them progressives and liberals for want of better labels, right? And the progressives, the sort of harder left, the campus left, has been pissed off at the sort of conventional liberals for a long time about a lot of things. And then this thing put it all on steroids. And so there was a lot of bad will already between sort of the squad wing versus sort of the, Steny Hoyer wing of the Democrats,
establishment.
Right? Yeah, right, exactly. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's so fraught for Democrats and how they handle this. But then there's still the question of why would anybody? The amazing thing to me was on October 7th, right? I'm watching MSNBC, and for reasons having to do with original sin or something, and they have that Ali Velshi guy and a couple other guys on there in real time going to reports of them still finding bodies, them still fighting Hamas terrorists, reports of rape and abductions, videos of the girls being taken out of the concert. And they go immediately into, we have to understand there's a context here. And, only Qatar so far has offered any nuanced underappreciation of the context here. And Qatar's statement was Israel is solely to blame for this. And then within days, hours, you get people attacking, screaming at Jews everywhere for being offended, being outraged that that Hamas terrorists would slaughter and rape and mutilate Israeli civilians. That is really weird. Like, it'd be one thing if this thing started with some sort of Israeli incursion into Gaza, but it didn't. It started with these guys crossing a border in a surprise attack and going full Viking raider on civilians. And I think part of the broader explanation is, I'm sure you've heard all those BS about settler colonialism, right? This is this doctrine, which you can trace back to Franz Fanon in the 1960s and this sort of anti-imperial stuff. But if you actually look at it, it really doesn't take hold on campus left until the 1990s. And I think what it is it's a substitute for the old sort of Soviet-backed anti-Israel stuff after the Cold War ends. And it's this ideology that says that it's married into the white supremacy nonsense and all that, that says Israelis are illegitimate and they are basically doing to the indigenous people, the Palestinians, what Americans or Australians did to Aboriginal or Native American people, and there is no quarter that should be given for that. And it's this ideological framing that gives you a permission structure to say the most grotesque barbarities can be justified when you're trying to deal with quote unquote settler colonial powers. And then one of the other questions, which I'm still struggling with, is how much of this anti-Semitism is new? How many people were sort of blue-pilled into or red-pilled into anti-Semitism overnight because of the context of this and social media? And how many of them were just waiting for an excuse to unload it? Because it's amazing to me, if you looked at the initial campus reactions, college presidents at Harvard and all these places, these people were literally saying you had no free speech rights to use phrases like, I don't know, master bedroom, right? You couldn't say, you couldn't use like normal words that were triggering in any way. You couldn't misgender somebody because that was violence, right? And then you have people talking about the eradication of Israel, the elimination, river to the sea, glory to the martyrs, all this kind of stuff. And all of these campus administrators and professors are like, well, look, this is complicated. You can't, there are two sides here. And it's like, so they're not two sides for saying master bedroom, but there's but there's deep and rich context to saying we must slaughter the Jews. And that double standard is really just fundamentally an anti-Semitic standard, particularly when you're attacking not Israelis on campus, but anybody in a yarmulke, any Jewish person, anybody who supports Israel. And that sort of structurally anti-Semitic way of thinking about things, I think that's been built up over a long time, and it was just waiting for something to ignite all this kindling that was laid down. And all my life, I've never really been afraid of anti-Semitism. I got a lot of anti-Semitic emails all my life, and that kind of thing, some hate mail, whatever. But this is a good and decent country, and there's just never been any reason for me to feel remotely unsafe in that way. And now, I legitimately, feel that's no longer the case. And also, I'm a very secular Jewish guy, right? I'm like not particularly religious and not observant at all. It makes me want to wear a yarmulke just because I want to become a helicopter of fists when some of these people start screaming this stuff, because it's just so outrageous, right? I mean, it really does bring out this sort of like, okay, if every member of my tribe needs to be eliminated, then I might as well like go all in on my tribe, right? And that's a weird emotion for me too.
It's the whole thing is weird. I mean, you get to a problem in politics in general, which is this sort of allowance of false premises to take hold. In this, the example you give is the settler colonialism narrative, which is riddled with half truths. Okay, right. I mean, that is a legitimately complicated story of how settlers end up where they end up. And that story spans hundreds of years. People think it spans like 1 year. Right. And the creation of Israel, that's just not the case. This is a complicated historical event over the course of many decades. But the point is,
Jews living there for thousands of years, right? I mean, it's not, they are as indigenous in any sense as the Palestinians or other people. It was a sparsely populated place for a couple thousand years, but before that,
If
Jews
we
are
want to play
evident.
the game of who was,
Yeah.
if we want to play the game of who was there first, it's very clearly the Jews.
Yeah, or at the very least,
like,
it's a wash, right? I mean, it's like it becomes a silly sort of argument at some point. But to say that like somehow they're all interloper, like they're Irish convicts sent by the British to Australia is just not. It's not a right analogy. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, no. But it's a bigger problem, and when we generalize that problem to the rest of the issues that we focus on and think about, false premises narratives lead to entire movements and policy platforms. We're seeing it all the time, and we'll get into a conversation about populism, what that is, and like to me, that's a lot of the story of populism, because it is based on feelings, and so and feelings naturally give way to false premises, and then you end up with this sort of weird like mixture of policy platforms that aren't really connected by any philosophical glue, but they're popular, at least with enough people to make them an idea that you have to contend with, and to people who are, I think, well studied and based in conservative history and intellectualism, you're like, why are we having that conversation?
Right.
We've had that conversation 1,000 times already. You think it's new. Just because you think it's new doesn't mean it's new.
Right.
I don't even know where I'm going with this, but I want to kind of lead the way to the rest of our conversation. But I want to say, when we're thinking about this problem with kind of Hamas sympathizing, which is, again, the thing I don't get. I understand everything you just said about this sort of this team and this frustration that they have with their own establishment Democrats, like coming out finally. I just don't get it, I guess, because it's such bad strategy on their part.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your goal is to really win the argument, it's such an insanely bad strategy. And why didn't they act this way before? I mean, there's wars every couple of years. There was one in 2021 where this same sort of conflict had not to this scale, but there was a conflict nevertheless. And that would have been a better time if you were going to go all in. Wouldn't have that been a better time to go all in because they didn't kill 1,200 civilians and burn babies alive? And yet it's now, and I didn't get a bunch of pro Hamas commentary on my social media back then. I do now.
Yeah,
I posted a picture of my baby, and some of the immediate reactions are, okay, well, that's great, but why don't you care about Palestinians being? Why are you advocating for their murder? And I'm like, well, I'm not. I don't know. It's not the point. The point is it's very, very intense. It's like this, for some reason, they chose this time as their strategic moment to make their argument, and it seems like a really bad time, strategically speaking.
No, I agree with that, and we can. I'm happy to get off of all this, but like just very quickly, I do think this is one of these phenomena that what social scientists would call overdetermined. There are a lot of different reasons for it, different explanations that explain some of it, but there's just too many reasons why this is happening to focus and say, this is the one reason why it's happening. I mean, for example, this can be exaggerated, but like, Chinese state media is full of crazy anti-Semitic stuff right now. They are pushing wild anti-Semitic stuff all over the place. And even on, and people say, well, TikTok, that's just user generated. Well, like, try to say something about China's treatment of the Uyghurs on TikTok and you'll get shut down. But if you want to talk about how the perfidious Jews are controlling the planet and Israel is committing war crimes, you're free to run with that stuff on TikTok.
Go with it.
Yeah. And so there's some of that stuff there's a strategy behind it. I also think there's a psychological thing that's really hard to articulate.
Or the 9/11 letter. I mean, the letter to America. Like you're telling me that there's nothing there. You're telling me there's no Chinese diplomats or bureaucrats thinking, let's let that one slide a little bit further, right? Because it's so damaging. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that it was a plan by the Chinese. The Chinese can just say, hey, this is promising. Let's signal boost this, right? It doesn't have to be the full Manchurian candidate strategy. It just has to be, hey, let's run with this, right?
It's targets of opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. And Russia plays a similar game. They're very much in sort of dividing the West. This has been very good for Russia. I believe that Iran and Russia had some sort of veto power over this, but like Russia really wants people to take the eye off Ukraine, and this helps with that. So, I mean, there are a bunch of those sort of geostrategic things, but I also think there's a psychological thing that's really kind of hard to articulate, which is just simply that when the people you're rooting for, to one extent or another, do something so terrible, cut off the heads of babies, murder children in front of their parents or parents in front of their children, right? You have no place to go except on offense, right? It's sort of like,
I guess you're right. Yeah.
The Steve Bannon thing with the the Access Hollywood tape, right? He's the one who realized this is indefensible, so I'm going to defend it entirely and attack anybody who doesn't, right? And it kind of works in this because one of the things we privilege in our culture are people who are willing to say the most obnoxious, transgressive, indefensible things with certainty and confidence. There's something that arouses admiration in people about that. I don't get it on a personal level or spiritual level.
It's conviction.
It's a
right?
thing.
Because we view conviction as a compliment. If I say, well, that's a person has conviction, that's always seen as a compliment. But I've never really used this as a compliment because I always have my next question, which is convicted about what?
Right. Convicted to what principles? Exactly. Yeah. It's like the old aging hippie liberals who sold out and got real jobs. They always would talk about these aging underground weatherman types, these 60s radical Black Panther types who never sold out, as if like somehow that made them better people. They stuck to their terrorist principles to the bitter end. And that's something in weak people, I think, is to say, well, at least they're committed to a cause, right? It's like there's that scene in Apocalypse Now where Marlon Brando is talking about how incredibly powerful the will of the Viet Cong was to cut off the inoculated arms of every child in the village. And that was the kind of thing that he really admired, right? There's this weird thing about this romantic love of villains who stick to a code and are never sell out. And my view is if you're committed to really evil things, you should sell out. You should abandon evil things,
You should. And yet they don't. And look, I mean, there's those evil people, and you might say they're 7% of the population. And I got that number from somewhere, and I think from somebody who sort of knew what they were talking about. It may have been Arthur Brooks, and it's just based on the personality spectrum. Okay, there's a good 7% that are really out there, and you might even call them psychopath. They might have psychopathic tendencies. Let's not call them psychopaths, but psychopathic tendencies. They're going to score very high on certain personality traits like disagreeableness, things like that. Conscientiousness go very low, and so they're going to be out there. You're not going to get along with the 7% really well, but they're also very loud and they have a lot of conviction about whatever it is they're convicted about, and then they get very political very quickly as well. And one of the problems we see, and I think this is going to lead us to our conversation about where we are in the left and the right in our politics more generally, which is, you as a politician, I can kind of ignore that 7%. But the problem is social media has given that 7% an outsized platform. And then I have to worry about another approximately 20 to 30%, or perhaps more. It's hard to pin down this number, but I have to worry about a whole other segment of the population that is easily persuaded by that 7%. Now they can be persuaded back, right? They're not psychopaths. They're and they don't want to be evil. But they're susceptible. There are susceptible people. And to me, that's the kind of the ultimate explanation for bad policy ideas and how they metastasize. Now the story is different every time, but it's based upon, I think, this again, it's a series of half truths that are told by a bad 7%, but then believed by another 20 to 30% who actually are also squeaky wheels, who also tend to be very passionate primary voters, whether it's Democrat or Republican primary voters, and then create realities that we didn't think were possible when 80% of the population thinks it's stupid. Right.
Yeah, I mean, so part of that, I mean, like, and again, we're not necessarily talking about people who are Hamas supporters, and at least not on the Republican side, but the general dynamic that you're talking about, I agree with. I think part of the problem is it's sort of the media ecosystem. Like, if you honestly never hear the counter argument to the stuff the loudest voices are saying, and the only time, let's put it this way, and this is a much more mainstream point than sort of the 7% are evil and Hamas and all that. But like, one of my big frustrations, it should be no secret to anybody here. I've been a critic of Trump for a very long time. One of my frustrations was at Fox, where I was there for 12 years, I think 11, 12 years. I was never asked any questions about what I thought about Trump certainly once Trump became president. The only people who criticized Trump were Democrats or crazy liberals, right? And so when Trump did things like that I thought were unconstitutional or ill-advised for conservative reasons, industrial policy, protectionism, whatever, I never really was given an opportunity to say anything about it. And so the average viewer who only hears that from the other team will think, okay, all good Republicans, all good conservatives agree 100% with these things. And so then when I start saying this stuff and they hear it from me, they, oh my God, you've moved so far to the left. You're not a conservative anymore. So, no, I'm actually having the same position I've had for 30 years. But the way we have our sort of tribal cable news, ghettos and social media ghettos, if you're making arguments that you could hear from the other team, that must mean you're a traitor to the team. And if and that kind of thing reinforces a lot of this stuff. People on the left and people on the right who are good and decent people, they're so siloed, and they only if they only listen to the people who already agree with them and tell them what they want to hear, they're never going to hear the counter arguments to anything. And there are very few debates on social media, I mean, or certainly on cable news, of any that are remotely meaningful. So you never get to hear the best arguments from the other side. I don't necessarily mean left, right. I just mean like intra-conservative arguments about various things, because people can disagree about what the right conservative policy should be. But instead you get this sort of popular front attitude of enforced orthodoxy. And if you veer from it, then it must be because you're a traitor or you have ulterior motives or whatever. And I think that that's what gets that 30% to go along with the 7%.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. You wrote some interesting pieces recently, and I'm trying to find the one quote I disagree with, but it was about the purist caucus. Okay, and so this idea that and you talk about, we should dive into this a little bit more, but
sure,
because your historical analysis of this is excellent, but I want to get to it in a second. What you basically say is, the dog caught the car. Right. Conservatives caught the car. The Republican Party was not always the modern conservative movement that you believe it is now. It was a much bigger tent, and the American people were different. Life was different. Like conservatism, as in the William F. Buckley mold, didn't exist for a long time, and we weren't winning it for a long time. I mean, you wrote about how it was the Buckley movement, which we would consider like establishment conservatism at this point. Was considered the crazy fringe by Nixon and Eisenhower. I think I love it when you write history, because you teach me things every time you write something, and I think that's just super interesting how that's happened. And so then, but once you catch the car and your goal is to be the most conservative, well then by definition you have to start moving goalposts, and then no matter how conservative of a place you're in, you have to call somebody else less conservative than you in order to win over that primary base. Here's the one thing I disagreed with. You said that there's this outside kind of a media establishment, or I call it a media establishment. I'm not sure what your word, echo chamber, I think is the word you used. I call it the establishment, or I call it the conservative media industrial complex. Which I actually stole that term from Matt Gaetz, of all people. He's very self-aware about like the like what that is. I mean, I'll give him credit for that. And you said that they pander to the purists. I argue that that's the one thing I disagree with. It's the opposite. It's the opposite. The incentive structure for politicians who are honestly, and you might say something different about some of the older ones who kind of started that movement, who I think know who they are, if that makes sense. I think there's a lot of newer ones who don't know who they are and haven't established themselves, who I think their entire purpose in running for Congress sometimes is to simply pander to that echo chamber. They believe it's everything. They believe that hiring that one 23-year-old influencer to retweet their stuff is that's somehow equal to success. And it's created a major problem. because it creates that incentive structure for the kind of the half truths and the refusal to debate. And I think the outcome has been this sort of populist movement, which is inherently difficult to define.
So, I mean, I'll just go big picture, and you tell me where you want me to stop. I think one of the biggest problems in our politics stems from two things. Two of the biggest problems in our politics are, one, the parties are too weak, not too strong.
Yeah, I agree.
In the old days, parties are supposed to think about how to get more members of their party elected and to have bigger and bigger majorities and to accomplish more and more things and to protect their brand. The parties now are so weak because of campaign finance reform, which I think was a disaster. I think Mitch McConnell was exactly right in his opposition to McCain-Feingold, and also because of the primary system. So politicians, and I don't mean to tell you your business, but politicians, the incentive to get reelected has never gone away, right? Politicians want to get reelected as a rule. And it used to be when we were growing up that the danger to incumbency was a general election. Now the danger to incumbency is a primary, not in every place, but in more and more places, right? Because there are only like there are very few swing districts left, right? And so that creates an incentive structure for people to, on the left and the right, to do as much or as little as they have to, just not to get a primary challenge. And that means catering to a segment of the party that has a certain set of expectations and understandings about what parties are for that I think is just wrong. And the second problem is that Congress is broken. Congress doesn't do its job the way it's supposed to. It doesn't have committee hearings the way it's supposed to. It doesn't do fact-finding the way it's supposed to. It doesn't have regular order the way it's supposed to. It doesn't do budgeting the way it's supposed to. And Congress is supposed to be the place in our political system that soaks up politics. And so that we don't have politics in the rest of our lives. And so just as weak parties cause strong partisanship, weak Congress, when it doesn't soak up like a wetland, when it doesn't soak up all the toxins and pollutants of our politics in Congress where people work these things out, it spills out into the rest of the country. So you have all sorts of media outlets that basically see themselves as proxies of one party or the other. You have special interests now because of the changes in campaign finance where, look, say what you will about NRA or Planned Parenthood, right? Obviously, I'm more pro NRA than I am Planned Parenthood, but like they do more party work than the parties do. And because they have their direct voter education, issue framing, all these kinds of things, voter mobilization. And so they reach out, they have a direct, relationship with their donors that gives them an incentive not to compromise for the greater good of the party. And so you have all of these institutions that are no longer being corralled into parties to actually work on what everyone can live with. And instead you have all these special interests who are just going over the heads of everybody and going straight to voters, especially small donors. And that generates a bunch of stuff. Look, at the end of the day, your job as a relatively sane Republican congressman would be much easier if you had a majority of 40 or 50 seats. And it should be, I'm not saying it's the top priority of every congressman to do whatever you can do to get a majority of 40 or 50 seats, but it shouldn't be that low on the list. And instead you get
it should be pretty high.
Yeah. And so instead you get the system where in both parties, right? You have people who do everything they can to be pundits, everything they can to raise a lot of money, but don't do a lot of legislating. And a lot of them don't even have any institutional memory about how to legislate. And so instead, whenever one party gets into power, they swing for the fences, they try to shoot the moon and do everything they possibly can, which is going to get them thrown out of office in the next election or the one after.
Well, it's going to get, it's the correction just real quick. It's not going to get them thrown out of office. It's going to get them more fundraising dollars.
Right.
It's going to get their colleagues thrown out of office who are in,
it's going to get the vulnerable ones thrown out. Right. It's going to get the majority makers thrown out. The people from the plus 30 R seats or plus 30 D seats, they get to be jackasses because it's completely cost-free to them and it guarantees they won't get primaried. And so you need a stronger party, you need a stronger structure that allows a party to think about building a majority coalition, and that takes a series of elections. And we've had
one thing I tell voters all the time is, but look, if I, as a politician, can campaign against the establishment and become more popular with my base as a result of doing so, that by definition negates the existence of the establishment.
Right.
There is no establishment. If 4% of our conference can depose the speaker, by definition, there's no establishment. So stop using the word establishment. It doesn't exist. To the extent that it does, it is the media industrial complex full of influencers online, podcasters, talk show hosts, radio show hosts. That's the establishment, because they do have power when acting collectively, and they often do act pretty collectively to sway elections, right? To cause those primary voters to swing back, to rebel against their member because they took a tough vote. And there's certain groups that are, of course, the cause of that. I mean, NRA is an interesting example because, I mean, I like the NRA. I mostly because I think they want to win, and I like people who want to win. I think they're genuinely interested in winning and in picking battles that they can win, and in also being a little bit forgiving and understanding of political realities and understanding how to navigate those. And then you have other like gun groups that are just so far out there, they never want to win. They want to go to the right of the NRA and raise money as a result. Winning would be horrible to them because they need to keep their base and their donors angry and in order to stay motivated. There's a lot of groups like that, and I encourage
the NRA is kind of the establishment of the gun rights crowd, right? And so they're getting henpecked by these little gun groups. I agree with the point, but it's worth pointing out, just because of the nature of their politics, the NRA used to give to a lot of Democrats. It was probably better for gun rights to have supporters in both parties rather than be all in on one party, right? And that's a problem for a lot of interest groups, and interest is this sorting has gone by issue too. And it means that whenever one party gets unified control of government, they screw these other institutions on the other side, and vice versa. And it's just no way to run a railroad.
No, and let's focus on the notion of Congress being broken for a minute. I think that's an interesting. Everybody says it, and I'm always wondering what it means. Is it broken? Yeah, but I guess but what does fixed look like, and why is it broken? Because I would contend that it's broken because it does indeed absorb the politics. It absorbs them too well. I tell voters all the time, I'm like, look, the Congress is actually a perfect representation of the American people. You don't want to hear it, but it's a near perfect representation of the American people. You've got so much diversity in the Congress, diversity of preferences, diversity of backgrounds, and diversity of intellect and ability. And so I think it's a normal population.
I like diversity of intellect, which is a really polite way of saying there are a lot of idiots in there.
I always say the average IQ in Congress is 100. It's just okay. I mean, it's not above 100. It's not necessarily below, but I don't think it's above 100. Which, of course, for listeners is just the average IQ.
Right.
And so I think it's a fine representation. I'm not sure. Like there's structural, people are always looking for structural changes and solutions to a problem, whether it's campaign finance or whether it's the way we do the budget process, however it is. And I've never been a huge proponent of these ideas. I mean, there's some I could get behind. Like I offered some rule changes, for instance, to ensure that we never had a speaker's race like we had just in the last few weeks. And a couple of those rule changes were simply, for one thing, if a speaker is vacated, he is not actually vacated, or she is not actually vacated until there is truly a new speaker elected. All right. That's just a continuity of government problem that we had there.
That's a good idea. That's a good reform. I like that.
A second one would be, and this is a little bit daring, if you will, but you elect a speaker based on a plurality vote instead of majority vote. And that would force your vote to actually mean something. It couldn't just be some virtue signaling. And this is a key difference between certain congressmen, right? Some people view their vote as a virtue signal. Many people view their vote as a virtue signal. I like to view my vote as the vote, as if I were the only one voting, and this actually has consequences that I can't escape from. I think that's a more responsible way to view your vote. And so you'll see me vote for tough things like a clean CR the other, like twice in the last couple of months. I don't like voting for those. I voted against them under Trump when he was president, but we're in the majority now and we don't have a choice. Well, I mean, well, sure, you always have a choice, but that choice is your service members in the military don't get paid. Like that's right. Your choice. And that's not a good choice for me. Just for the sake of some puritanical stance and grandstanding and pontificating, which many like to do. And, you know, you're in a frustrating place, but is it because Congress is broken? I don't know. I mean,
so I'll give you an example of what I mean by Congress broken. You tell me where I'm wrong. You know, I got into this fight on CNN a week or so ago, where people were talking about whether Mike Johnson's going to last and Kevin McCarthy and the craziness in the Republican caucus. And part of my point is that it was broken when Nancy Pelosi was running it too, because she was just better at running the broken institution under the new rules. And I think a lot of blame for this goes back unintended to Newt. Paul Ryan, who's a friend, was guilty of some of this. But again, they were presented with a system that they didn't have the power, the votes, the majority to be able to fix. So they worked within the realm of the possible, right? But the realm of the possible is bad. There's a reason why every Democrat gets run when in a general election, the Republican always says he voted 100% of the time with Nancy Pelosi, or he voted 100% of the time with Kevin McCarthy. And that's because so much legislation is written in the four corners of, you know, in the leadership office, in the speaker's office or in the majority leader's office, and then presented to guys like you as a fait accompli, and it's an up or down vote. The way it's supposed to work is it's supposed to work bottom up, where like committees work through legislation. They hear competing witnesses. It's supposed to be a process of discovery, right? And adversarial, but also, you know, good faith. And in part because I think the televisions and the committee rooms have ruined a lot of the way hearings are supposed to work. And because you have these tight caucuses with very little room for error, and so many sort of freelancers, the leadership feels like, no, they gotta like do all the legislating behind closed doors and then give people 3 days at most to read this thing. And then that becomes the legislation. I think the way it's supposed to work is the way it worked for a very long time, which is that legislation came out of committees, and that's one of the reasons you could have bipartisan stuff, is because you had people from different districts with different interests, or different states with different interests, and they could work out. Sometimes it'd be ugly horse trading and compromise, but at the end of the day, there'd be buy-in for it. And instead, it boils everything down to basically a parliamentary system where the government with a party in power dictates what legislation is going to look like and just tells everybody else, you got to go along with it. Am I wrong about that?
Well, a little bit, because we changed it. I mean, that was one of the big complaints that, you know, when we took the majority, that we said we would change, and for the most part, we've stuck to that. Any major piece of legislation that's come out of this majority has gone through that process, right? What's oddly enough, where there are exceptions to that, were from the purist caucus, because that was part of the 20 demands to Kevin McCarthy. If we look at amendments that get put in order to any of these, major pieces of legislation that have indeed gone through the regular order and done the right way, Pelosi ran that a very specific way. We changed that. Everything you're saying is correct about how Pelosi ran it. That's not my experience in this majority, and therefore, but that comes with other problems, which I think are worth talking about. But ironically, again, the exceptions to that rule, to the regular order rule, have been from the people who were the loudest demanding regular order. You know, regular order, as long as it didn't apply to them when they wanted their funny little amendment put on the floor.
Yeah, no, look, I agree with that. Like, just to be clear for where I'm coming from, the purist caucus, as I've called it, I agree with Chip Roy and Matt Gaetz about a lot of their objections, and I think that they are right in articulating them. I think Chip Roy is largely sincere in his objections and actually would like to see the reforms actually happen. I don't personally think that Matt Gaetz gives a rat's ass about any of this stuff, and it is just simply a pretextual excuse to justify what he wants to do. I mean, it's not like he's trying to get rid of Mike Johnson, who's doing a lot of the same things that Kevin McCarthy was doing. It's a performative thing for him. And So I get a little frustrated when I hear people make the right arguments for the wrong reasons. And but I
Well,
I think the House Freedom Caucus guys, a lot of them are right on their critiques of the institution. Their problem is that they want to make the perfect the enemy of the good and shut everything down and have these crazy fights over like the debt ceiling or government shutdowns when they know they don't have the votes. And that when they know that it's going to be where losing for them is a victory too.
yes,
But it
that's a
costs,
key. But that's a really key point. They
yeah,
believe that, and they'll tell you that they believe that.
yeah.
And they'll tell you there's value in that dying on the hill. And I always kind of make fun. I always make fun of that analogy because just coming from my SEAL background, I take dying on hills quite seriously. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what if that's how we fought battles and
Right.
wars, just dying on hills? It'll look cool. Like I
Yeah.
can charge the hill, guns blazing. I'm going to look really cool, right? I'm going to look
Yeah.
like a badass, but I'm going to die.
Right.
And then I will not live to fight again. Now in this in this fake war world, or this fake fighting world where everybody uses the word fight all the
Right.
time, but never actually fights anything. There's no consequences. And that's the major problem. And what I tell people all the time is, look, a proper strategy consists of two things, or a proper winning strategy consists of two major elements. One is your principles, right? You have to be anchored in some kind of principled approach. Okay. And so, many of my friends in the Freedom Caucus certainly have a principled approach. They know who they are. They know what they believe. Again, I would probably say that that's it's more characteristic of the older ones than the newer ones sometimes. But in any case, at least there's, okay, so you got that part. But then there's a part that's wholly missing in the set, but it's a really important part, which is an acceptance of political reality.
Right.
So if you don't accept the reality that you're in, if you believe that you live in a different reality, then you can't apply the principles properly. And you certainly can't come up with a strategy that moves those principles forward. And that's the ultimate debate, and it's the ultimate frustration. I think it's part of what led to this speaker's race debacle. A lot of it was actually just personal. With there's personal issues with each of those candidates that were effectively beheaded in this sort of Game of Thrones manner,
right.
that occurred. It had very little to do with principle. And you could see that even in, let's say the CR, because, Chip might have those principles, and Chip's a good friend of mine, and we've stood shoulder to shoulder together, fighting for difficult principles. January 6th being I think a major one that I've always, I've always considered him a principled person because of that. But me and him will definitely have discussions about what is realistic and what is not. We just have entirely different frames of mind on that. I mean, I sometimes just have no idea where he's coming from on a certain issue, and there's frustrating things too, where it does seem like it's, wants to help be productive, move the ball forward here and here and here, only to publicly just annihilate it a second later, which is that just becomes an exhausting pattern for those of us who just are trying to get those individual conservative wins. So we're talking about the budget process too, and whether that's broken or not. And I think that's an interesting conversation, because that was always going to be McCarthy's problem, was dealing with a CR, because that's the battle cry for a lot of those on the hard right, or the hardliners, or the purists, or whatever we want to call them. I don't like saying conservatives, because I see actually very little difference in conservative philosophy between a lot of them and a lot of our so-called moderates. I think we're actually all on a pretty good, solid team when it comes down to philosophy. But the budget process, I'm gonna throw something out there and get your reaction to it. I'm not sure it's broken. I mean, it's broken, sure, but broken compared to what? And I think we've hyped ourselves up and gotten into this sort of obsession with regular order on the budget. And I'm like, who wrote the regular order? It's the 1974 Budget Act, right? It's some people in the early 70s, and we're losing their ideas on 12 appropriations bills, and we get really obsessive about 12 appropriations bills that by themselves, by the way, aren't even that really like labor and HHS. Like, why is that an appropriations bill? These two things aren't really connected. But we get really obsessive about properly passing 12 appropriations bills, never voting for an omnibus. And nobody goes out and tells their voters a little bit of truth, which is you've got an incredibly complex government. And honestly, maybe the broken part of this budget process is the idea that it needs to be, this sort of like zero budgeting idea every single year, which is a near impossible task for a deeply divided government. And you've got amendments being thrown into the appropriations process that are like, cancel out this office, cancel out this agency, defund it 50%. And you're like, how do you know that that's the right thing to do?
Right.
I know for a fact there's not a lot of thought put into those amendments. I know for a fact that the people writing those amendments didn't go visit that agency to get a very clear idea of like what they do and what could be cut. And not that's now, first of all, it's very difficult to do because it's a huge and enormously complex government.
Right.
But we've gotten very obsessive over the idea of never having an omnibus. And I explain to people, do you know how an omnibus happens? And you know why it happens every single time? Because even if you did pass 12 appropriations bills, when it gets to the Senate and you don't have you don't have a 60 vote majority, which you're pretty much never going to have, you're going to have to negotiate with the other side at one point. And when you start negotiating, let's assume that those 12 bills actually exist, which they never will, because we can't even agree on our own side what those 12 bills should be. So we've only passed a fraction of them, maybe I think 7, 8, 9. You start horse trading. You start saying, well, okay, I don't like what you did in that appropriations bill, so why don't we change this one, and then we can make a deal there. And then that's how you come up with an omnibus, and that's how you always come up with an omnibus and a CR. And so is it the right thing to do? Not necessarily. I'm not saying that, but it's also a bit inevitable because of the political dynamics and the realities that we find ourselves in. And so I don't find myself being angry about it. I would, and I view it as fake anger because I'd be fake angry about something that's largely outside of our control. But I'll let you comment.
No, look, I think that's all terribly fair. And you're right. I personally don't really care that much about how the sausage is made when it comes to the House Senate, conference, negotiation kind of thing. And I am totally open to the idea that there are larger. We'll know that podcasters have real power in this country when leaf blowers are banned midday in my neighborhood.
I can't hear them, but
there we go. Okay, so I think it's a really fun point. I think though that part of the problem is that you have the congressman that you're talking about who are saying, cut this agency by 50%, who never went and visited the agency, is a function of the way in which so much of Congress has become performative, because so much of the power has been taken out of committee chairs and out of like committees and put into the leadership. Now, the leaders, Paul Ryan, again, who's a friend of mine, who, he would say, hey, look, you don't understand. The reason why we had to sort of consolidate control on a lot of this stuff was because there were so many people who just wanted to cause trouble and would gum up the works so that you couldn't really have regular order because nothing would ever get done. And I get it. What is it Orwell says? He says, a man can feel himself a failure and take to drink and become all the more of a failure because he drinks. There are a lot of different reasons for why Congress has the dysfunctions that it has. But I think that, like, if you just look at the incentives for a lot of the most famous Congress people, you're kind of an exception. But I don't know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? I mean, like, she raises more money than, all but a handful of people. She basically names post offices, right? There is this, the incentive to do serious, hard legislative work is not where it should be, right? It should be much stronger to do that. And so, like, for 20 years, I've been going around speaking to conservative groups, and people would tell me, yeah, we got to get the Rockefeller Republicans out of the establishment, right? And I was like, you do realize that the Rockefeller Republicans went extinct in the Pleistocene era. There are no Rockefeller Republicans out there. John Boehner, Newt Gingrich, Paul Ryan were in succession the the most conservative speakers of the House, at least in the last 100 years, right? The issue wasn't that they weren't conservative enough or they weren't pure enough or any of that kind of stuff, is that they didn't have the kind of majorities and the kind of political cachet or power to achieve everything all at once. And so the Bannon wing of conservative, I definitely don't want to call Bannon, the populist wing of things says any failure is explained by a lack of will, not by a lack of votes, right? And part of this, it was I was there for the 2013 nonsense with repealing Obamacare. I did not like Obamacare, never supported Obamacare, but you had people going around saying that they could repeal it with 40 votes in the Senate. You cannot repeal Obamacare with 40 votes in the Senate. And it doesn't matter how much willpower you have. And that gets into this this culture of losing thing, right? Where you have congressmen who they can go home and say, we were stabbed in the back and betrayed by those establishment sellouts, but we were willing to die, sorry for the phrase, die on the Hill for the cause. And so losing is proof of purity, whereas winning is a signal that you've compromised, right? That you've collaborated with the enemy, that particularly when you get into this paranoid stuff about, the deep state controlling everything. And look, there are problems with the administrative state, written a lot about it. But like when you say that working with the Biden regime is totally unacceptable, or getting votes from Democrats is 100% unacceptable, part of that stems from this thing is that they would rather lose than actually demonstrate that, incremental progress is possible. That maybe your opponents across the aisle may be wrong, but like there are reasonable things you could do. Kevin McCarthy had a win on the debt ceiling thing. It wasn't some glorious huge win, but it was a real win. And immediately people start saying we were betrayed, we were stabbed in the back, because the idea of having a win was proof that their rhetoric was kind of overblown about how you can't make progress and what we need is more fighters, right? It's like wins are seen as compromise while losing is seen as pure, and that is a wildly dysfunctional way to go through politics.
Yeah, it's a wildly and whether we're saying it causes Congress to be dysfunctional or politics to be dysfunctional, it's all kind of one and the same. I mean, in the end, it's voters. If voters will reward that kind of behavior, it will continue to happen. So I'm not like trying to defend the dysfunction of Congress, I guess, but I'm saying it's like it is simply representative of the political reality we live in, which has been created by forces far outside of Washington, D.C., or at least far outside of the Capitol.
I take your point, and I think it's a good one. And I think your point about how Ciara Zordanen is a very good one, and it's a point well taken. I will say that Congress, long before you got there, started outsourcing a lot of its jobs to like the executive branch and the judiciary.
Oh yeah,
in ways that denuded it of power, right? And I'm a big fan of the founding fathers. Don't want to amend the Constitution, but one of the things I think the founders just could not have foreseen was the way in which Congress as an institution ceased to be a zealous guardian of its prerogatives. And often you'll have senators and congressmen want to lobby the White House to make a rule change rather than actually propose changing any legislation, because changing legislation is hard. You're going to piss off X% of your constituents who don't want the change. But if you just lobby the White House, they take the political heat, but you get credit with the people you want credit with for being on the right side of things. And that's a really bad way to be doing things. Congress is the first branch of government. It's the most powerful branch of government. It's supposed to be the supreme branch. It's the first branch. And I think as an institution, Congress has lost sight of a lot of that.
I got a question for you then. You've read Thomas Sowell's book, Conflict of Visions. I think it's one of the greatest books ever when we're talking about the left and the right. He doesn't even use the terms left and right. He doesn't even use the terms Democrat and Republican or liberal and conservative. He explains how humanity throughout the ages, and no matter what geography you're talking about, is effectively split into these two groups that do manifest in liberal and conservative. but he's careful not to use the words. For some reason, I'm forgetting what terms he uses.
Constrained and unconstrained.
Yeah, the constrained and unconstrained visions. And so, the constrained vision being a more conservative vision, right? Constrained by certain limiting principles, unconstrained being the opposite, unconstrained by limiting principles. And that manifests eventually in very clear policy differences. My question for you is, what did our founders see it that way? Did they envision that? I think it's clear they didn't, but why didn't they envision our country eventually segregating into these sort of two different philosophical ideas that naturally butt up against each other? Because I see the conflict of visions happen in every country, whether they have multiple party systems or not, third parties, fourth parties, fifth parties. They all eventually congregate into coalitions that represents a sort of left and a right, as we would define it here in the U.S. How do you think our founders miss that, or did they not miss it, or I don't know?
Yes, it's an interesting question. One way, just for listeners to sort of explain it, is the constrained vision sees everything about choices between competing goods or competing bads, right? Like, what is the to govern is to choose. So if you're going to spend $1,000 on this, that means you're not spending $1,000 on the other thing, right? And at getting at a more metaphysical level, it gets into this notion of human nature being built from the crooked timber of humanity, that we cannot perfect human nature. So the most unconstrained vision regimes, Stalinism, Maoism, the Jacobins, those guys, they had this view that human beings were infinitely malleable and you could just make them into the new Soviet man or whatever and change.
And you could do so without trade-offs. You could do so without trade-offs.
Right.
That's
well, you have to kill a bunch of people, but the people who are left, they can all be exactly what they wanted.
But in modern times, that trade-off point is a really important one. I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's an important one because it is how Democrats do things. We can just make this new program and make this new thing happen. If we make a law that says you won't be unemployed, then you won't be unemployed. Right. If we make a law that says you'll have healthcare, you'll just have healthcare. There's no trade-offs. Right. So yeah, it's important.
I agree with that entirely. And that's the broad brushstrokes. That's the unconstrained vision, is that you can just simply will the world you want into reality, and that positive law will create, that human beings are smart enough, experts are smart enough to sort of design a utopian society. That's really what the unconstrained vision is it's utopianism in day-to-day life, right? And the I would argue the founding fathers certainly had human nature right, and so part of the way they set up the system the way they did is they knew there were always going to be wrong people. And they're going to be on the left and the right, and to the extent that those labels worked in the founding era, you could say Thomas Paine represented the left, and sort of the Edmund Burke Madisonian view was the right, if you want, or the John Adams view, and and so Thomas Paine wanted to move all of humanity forward to the sunny uplands of history together, and the Burkean view was no, people are self-interested. There are good things and bad things about human nature, but human nature is a permanent construct and or a permanent reality. And I think that part of the vision of the Constitution was to layer our politics, not just vertically, but horizontally, with so many competing sources of political power that these things would cancel each other out, or the worst would get washed out. Right. And so, it drives me crazy when I hear people say we're one election from the end of America. There's always another election. We have more elections in this country than any other country in the world, from top to bottom, from left to right. Every year, there's another bunch of elections. We have legislatures. We have separation of powers, legislative versus executive versus judicial. We have, bicameral systems all over the place. There are constant ways to sort of take the temperature of the voters, and the voters change their minds on a lot of things. And sometimes the wrong people become right and the right people become wrong, depending on the issue. And I think that their vision was that would get worked out. And I think one of the reasons why it's not working as well as it used to, one has to do with like the big sort and population separation and that kind of thing, and the changing media climate, but also because so much of what government does is now done on autopilot. that we kind of live in a country now where we want to elect a king every 4 years. And we just like, so Joe Biden does, tries to do loan forgiveness basically by like monarchical edict. And half the Congress wants him to do it because they're members of his party. And then when Trump's in, he wants to do things by edict, and the other half of the party basically goes with him. And that's part of the problem, is that Congress is supposed to be this breakwater, this circuit breaker against a lot of that kind of stuff. And instead, it's like America decided to have a parliamentary system, and whichever branch of government is controlled by the same party as the president, they kind of go their own way. And that's not what, how Daniel Webster worked or any of those kinds of guys. And
no,
I don't know how you fix that overnight. One of the ways would be to have stronger parties. One of the ways would be to tell voters to stop voting on whatever, stop donating and voting on whatever is making them angry at this given moment, and have a more long-term view of things. But it's going to be a hard problem to unwind.
It's extremely hard, but the problem lays with the populace, that it always does. Like you said, we have a lot of elected officials. I mean, it's worth putting a number on that. I'm not even sure I'm going to get it right, but I think I remember seeing some stat once that said we have approximately 600,000 elected officials in America, which really doesn't seem that out of line to me when you consider. I mean, look, if you go to when we vote on a Texas ballot, you might have 75 elections, because we elect judge. We're one of the few states that elect judges, for instance. I mean, dog catchers can get elected sometimes. So, it is a hyper democratic system, and you can change things. One of the main problems too is, look, 80%, 90%, even potentially of Americans are quite reasonable, analytical people, that can be persuaded with facts and reason. But a lot of them don't vote in primaries. I mean, a lot of them don't vote in primaries, and there's that's certainly something I'm taking on my political side, is how do I get people to stop saying you're just going to vote in the general election. Commit yourself to voting in the primary election and having your voice heard. I remind people all the time. I won my first election, didn't even win it. I got second place by 155 votes. That's you can make a difference really in these elections just by.
That's actually the place you can make a real difference, right? That's where your vote has the most power, is in the primaries.
Yeah. And especially because turnout is lower, just by definition, you have more power, and there's so many people who sit that out. And one of our biggest challenges is convincing them not to. And because look, people wonder, how do you get to this point where you don't like your choices before you? You got to that point because weak parties, and you didn't control your primary system. Now, how do you fix weak parties? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I think the Democrat Party is certainly a stronger party infrastructure than the Republican Party in terms of kind of forcing people to its will. But I always laugh when people talk about the Republican establishment. I'm like, what are you seeing exactly? Do you think there's like this a smoky room full of elders like a council of elders that sort of decides who shall be in the? I mean, I wish there was. I
got asked by so many normal Americans, how did the Republican Party even let Joe Santos run? And I was like, because he paid a $35 fee and filled out a form. It's like he just showed up. We are the only major industrial democracy in the world whose parties have voluntarily given up the ability to pick their own candidates. And I would give up primaries. I'm fine with getting rid of primaries. I really am. But I just don't think it's going to happen, right? It's your point about you got to do what's in the realm of the possible.
Well, I mean, I'd be interested to hear like how that would work then. Like, so like a jungle kind of election, like how would that
work? I'm still kicking the tires on the ranked choice voting stuff. I don't think it's necessarily been disastrous. I don't think it's necessarily the cure-all that its proponents make it out to be. But look, I mean, Virginia got Glenn Youngkin because they did a state party convention instead. And you get more people who are actually stakeholders in the good of the party to decide who their representative is going to be, and they're going to make a better choice. Not always, but more often than not. And
I have something to say about that. But
one of the best examples of it. Look, I mean, I agree with you about the people who show up in primaries, right? There's data on this. Most of the hyper partisan voters who show up and do all this kind of stuff, they actually hate their own party. They just hate the other party more. So they vote for the candidate who promises to destroy the other party, right? And like if you say, oh, I'm going to work with the other party to get things done, that disqualifies.
Don't say that. Say you're gonna
right.
First say you're gonna rhino hunt. First, get your rhino hunting gun out.
Right.
And
right.
then target the rhinos. Don't you know what? You can even spell it with an H, and people won't care. They still know what you mean. They still love you for it. You get that rhino hunting gun out, and you go, and then we can finally beat the Democrats. But the Democrats are an afterthought to the rhino hunting crowd.
Right. Well, and also, I mean, this was a story. I mean, this gets to sort of the radicalization of the right these days. In the 1960s, the most hardcore, serious radicals basically ignored conservatives. They couldn't give a rat's ass about the conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
They went after the liberals, hammer and tongs, right? The sort of establishment, mainstream, Truman Democrat, LBJ liberals. And LBJ was a very left-wing guy by my lights, but those are the ones they hated, because what it was a desire to take over the institution, right? To take over the party or take over the movement, as it were. And so your nearer friend is really your greater enemy in that kind of dynamic. That's the same thing you get on the right these days, where the hatred for the quote unquote establishment, which I've been looking for, like it's a Where's Waldo painting. It's an intense thing. And so you get this dynamic where it's something like 9% of the electorate ends up choosing the choices that 89%, that 91% of the electorate gets to choose from. It's a huge sign. We can talk about what's broken and what's not. It is at minimum a massive collective action problem that this country is about to vote on two presidential candidates that 70 to 80% of the American people would prefer not to vote for. And that gets at the sort of the supply chain problem of our politics.
Right. And in a microcosm of that was our speaker's race, where you've got McCarthy with 96% actual support in his own conference, and he still loses. Like that's why I came up with those rule changes, because I'm like, there's a glitch in the system, guys.
Right.
There's obviously a glitch in the system. And I don't always say that. I'm very careful as a good conservative. I'm very careful about what systemic changes I want to call for.
Right.
Because you've got to think of the trade-offs. And, I think most of our political problems are far more deeply cultural than they are systemic, in the sense that, they're when I say systemic, I mean the rules by which we operate. But there was some very clear systemic problems in the way we even elect a speaker. And I think my rule changes would change that entirely. Or at least put the incentive structures back in the right place. I mean, people have to believe that their vote matters, whether you're in Congress or whether you're a voter.
Right.
And I think there's just, as a voter, I get it. It's hard because look, you are voting along with hundreds of thousands of other people. And so it's very easy to stay home. It just is. I get it. I totally understand it. I just beg you to change your mind on that as a voter. I'm just begging you, because I think the statistics you were just reading were pretty much correct, from everything I've seen. I don't have them offhand, but as far as people being dissatisfied with their choices, and as far as the percentage that actually chooses those choices, I don't think you pulled those out of your ass. I think those are real.
No, they're directionally right. I mean, I'm sure you had different polls, but like it's 60 to 75% of voters say they don't want to vote for either of these guys, and like that's messed up. I mean, the best example of this actually comes from the Labour Party 15 years ago or whatever it was, said they wanted to democratize the system, become more American style. Instead of having just a handful of party members elect their leader, they decided to open up the doors to it. So they charged like a £1 fee to come up to the party conference. And so all the hives of scum and villainy across left-wing England emptied out and showed up at this thing. And they elected Jeremy Corbyn to be the leader of their party. Like when you open the doors to this stuff, you get the most motivated people to show up, and the normals don't do it. And I'm not saying everybody who votes in primaries isn't normal. It's just they're washed out by a lot of people who let me put it this way. I think earlier you put it really, really well. When you say you think about your vote, you think of it as a choice, right? That this is actually, I'm choosing between the options in front of me, not a signal, right? There are a lot of people who think that their voting is a signal, that they're sticking it to the man, that they're doing something performative, they're virtue signaling, whatever, and that the choices don't actually have real consequences beyond what it says about them. And I think that like thinking about who'd be a better congressman, who'd be a better president, who'd be a better presidential candidate, who'd be a better congressional candidate about winning a general election.
Who'd be better to win for our party and the conservative ideals we actually think we care about. Who would be a better advocate for that? That was actually my main primary, because I was, you know, my primary was 9 others, and everybody believed the same things.
Right.
And so how do you differentiate yourself? My argument to people was, I'm simply going to be a better advocate. I'm going to know what I'm talking about better than everybody else. And I'm going to know how to argue that against Democrats. You know, and that was actually a campaign promise that I think largely able to fulfill. You can't say you're going to do certain things for people that you can't fulfill, but a lot of people like to run on that. I'm going to impeach Joe Biden. No, you're not.
Right.
No, you're not. And by the way, you get Kamala Harris, so we should really think carefully about that. So I think she's far more terrible. But we get into this habit of fundraising off of that, and I actually want to allude to a piece that you wrote, which I thought was really interesting, about these dynamics that we're talking about are exacerbated by actually small dollar donations. And I didn't mean to cut you off. You were going to train of thought. Maybe that's right. If you feed into that piece that you wrote.
Yeah. So look, I got in a lot of trouble for that, and I wrote that piece in part because I had this offhand comment on TV. People, the usual suspects, lost their minds, said I'm against democracy and all this nonsense. And the simple fact is that the small donor stuff, there are a lot of good and decent small donors. I'm sure you have a lot of good and decent civic-minded small donors who give you money, and that's all fine, right? And I don't really know what a constitutional remedy to this would be anyway. But the simple fact is, I know for a fact that there are senators and congressmen who know that if they go on a certain cable show or a certain podcast and they set fire to their heads and they scream bloody murder about this, that, or the other thing, they can get a huge windfall from people giving them $25-$50 or going on auto pay, right? So all of a sudden, this is part of the weak party problem. It used to be when parties controlled the purse strings, the parties had this weird old-fashioned view of, let's put our resources behind the best candidate to win in the general election. And instead, what happens is, or the best candidate for the country. I mean, there are other considerations, right? But like now what you get is a lot of people who have these independent sources of revenue. They don't need to rely on big donors. And say what you will about big donors, most of the big donors I know actually believe in some things, right? They actually have, you know, a long-term horizon about what they're trying to get. It may be transactional, maybe cynical.
I've never been asked for one favor by a big donor. Never. And people ask me all the time, like, I'm sure they own you. I'm like, they honestly don't. They like,
I believe that entirely.
They've never asked for a favor.
Because
and also, like, if they did, I can find others too. So like, they know it's not even it doesn't work.
And so most of the big donors I know, and admittedly there's a selection bias thing, but like most of the big donors I know are actually, they may be wrong on this issue or that issue, but like they're kind of long time horizon kind of thinkers, and they want to win elections because they're putting in a big investment to like win an election. There are a lot of small donors who just like hearing we're going to destroy them, or we were betrayed by Kevin McCarthy or whatever stuff. And they like the performative firebrand stuff. And that sustains a lot of people who they've lost the incentive to like take any direction from the party to win, or if they're from some crazy safe seat, they just get to pad up their war chest. It's a messed up way of doing things. And like, I'm a big believer in democracy, but I don't think every institution should be democratized. I'm a big believer in transparency, but I think there's some places where transparency is bad. When you were serving in the armed forces, I don't think they always took a vote on what hill to take, right? I mean, like, nor did you have cameras in the tent where you were planning a strategy or tactics, right? There's some things you don't want everyone to see, and there's some things you don't want to put up for a vote. The old rule of thumb was this thing that comes out of the 1950 American Political Science Association report about the parties, is that democracy is the thing between the parties, not within the parties. But we've democratized parties to the extent where the most motivated voters provide a huge amount of the money and a huge amount of the primary votes. And And those voters are typically very, very, very angry about something. And that's where you get the problem with populism, is that there's always been populism in this country, but the role of our institutions used to be to channel that anger towards productive ends. Now that function, that editing function of popular anger, is gone because the incentives are all to be on TV. I mean, how many congressmen, quit their jobs to go become pundits on TV? I mean, it's because it's like you're auditioning when you're a congressman to go become a TV pundit. That's not a healthy thing for our democracy. We need people who actually want to listen to the anger of people and then figure out what's in the realm of the possible to actually make constructive choices about how to improve their lives or deal with it. And sometimes people are angry about things they shouldn't be angry about, but they don't know better. And whenever I make these kinds of points to people, people say, well, you don't understand about the thing about populism. You don't understand why people are just so angry. And I'm saying, I get that they're angry. Let me ask you, when was the last time you made a really good, thoughtful decision when you were just really pissed off? Right? When did you make did you make a really wise investment in the stock market right after you got cut off in traffic from some jackass? No, like there are times where you want to calm down and be measured and reasoned, and that's what our politicians are supposed to be doing. But the incentives aren't there for that.
And that's a pretty recent phenomenon, at least for the right. And it's happened in the last couple of elections where, look, as a leader, you can either build that emotional connection with that angry person and say, look, you're angry for a reason. I fully agree with the reason that you're angry. I'm not going to try and question it. I'm not going to tell you the truth about why Social Security is going bankrupt. I'm going to let you continue to believe that it's because the government has raided the Social Security Trust Fund, and I'm going to satisfy that anger as long as you vote for me. So that has become the new normal, and I think what largely defines populism is like, take the temperature of whatever sort of popular movement. I wouldn't call it popular. By definition, it's probably not over 50%, but it's enough of a constituency to where there's an incentive structure to just go ahead and follow that line, even though deep down it's not true. And so people like me find themselves on an island oftentimes being like, well, it's just not true. Like, so a great example was, I'll never forget this one because it was so heated. I even remember the bill number. I never remember bill numbers, I remember like conceptually what bills were about, but this was HR 550. And it actually did the opposite of what people thought it did. But what people thought it did was create this sort of like national vaccine database where you could, then track everybody on a national level and who's been vaccinated on whatever kind of vaccine. It didn't do that at all. If anything, it put guardrails on the ability to do that and made states reform their existing systems to do that. But a couple congressmen who wanted some attention, threw it out there that, Republicans just voted for a national vaccine database. And it's like, okay, so you have an option there. And a lot of people started voting against it at that because they saw the headline start right before the vote because they don't want to go to explain things to their constituents. Mm-hmm. And, I worry about things like that. I worry about things like term limits too. Like there's definitely a majority of congressmen. I'm curious what your opinion is on term limits, but there's definitely a majority of congressmen who say they're for term limits. Me being one of them in the past, I've publicly started to change my tone on that. I usually say something like, I'm technically for them because it's still so popular with you who I represent. However, I can't find a single good reason to justify that position. And what I tell my fellow congressmen in Washington is, okay, guys, it's at a certain point, we're all saying something that we know isn't true because we believe it'll never happen. But if we're all saying it, eventually it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And if you impose, serious term limits on congressmen or senators, I mean, there's reasonable term limits probably, right? I think there's probably reasonable ones, but the U.S.
age limits that I'm open to, right? That's a different question.
Yeah.
Though. Yeah.
But the pledges that activists make you take are like 6 years. So I'm like, let me get this straight. Me in my third term, like I'd be like anybody in their third term would be Speaker of the House. You think that person has enough institutional knowledge to really do a good job? Because I'll tell you what they're going to do? They're going to defer to staff, committee staff, and the bureaucrats in the administration. Because those are the people who do have the long-term institutional knowledge. And so you've just transferred power completely away from elected officials who are at least our incentive. You mentioned this before. What's our incentive structure to get elected? And I'm always like, because people use that as a derogatory against me. You just want to get reelected. And I'm like, technically, yes. But
Right.
doesn't that mean I at least have the support of 50+% of my constituency?
Right. Right.
I mean,
right.
isn't it, what better incentive would you like except to
Right.
get reelected? I mean, it's not perfect, but at least it's an incentive that empowers the people, as per our founding documents said, that the consent of the governed is what
Right.
gives the government power in the first
No,
place. At least it's that.
it's like telling someone who owns a diner, oh, you were working so hard on that food because you just want customers to come back. Look,
Yeah.
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 So, yeah, like I've had my sympathies with term limits in the past, but I've never really gotten too into it for precisely the reasons you suggest. I mean, again, I think the deep state stuff is often overblown, but just call it the permanent bureaucracy, right? It is a gift to the unelected people to say, okay, we're going to remove the most experienced people with the biggest storehouse of institutional knowledge because of some arbitrary number of terms they're supposed to serve. And I think a lot of reforms are done because there's a problem that and then this is one of the things that this is a very unconstrained vision thing. It's one of the things that conservatism used to talk a lot about, is the law of unintended consequences. There were a lot of problems with the chairman of the various committees just having too much power and a stranglehold over things and running them like fiefdoms, and Newt comes in and he term limits them. And that created a whole nother set of problems that he didn't intend. I think term limits, I understand where the desire comes from. I think the solution will not yield the remedies that people think it will.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, they're like, well, what about Nancy Pelosi? She's been there forever. Won't you want to term limit her? I'm like, oh, you could, but San Francisco voters will elect someone probably
A younger,
far
healthier,
crazier. Yeah, a younger, healthier, blue-haired, identifies as a dolphin on Thursdays, kind of liberal. Right. Like that's what will happen. It will not improve your state of mind any more. So it's just, sorry, but it's not going to work.
Now, in the wake of Dianne Feinstein and what we're seeing with Joe Biden, I think age limits are something that people need to look at, or cognitive tests of some kind as something that people need to look at. I mean, I remember I was in Washington for the last few years of Strom Thurmond, and he was doing everything from notes that his staff gave him because he was just out of it, and that's not good.
No, it's insane.
That's a sign that there's a strong political machine back home that can just deliver wins for you, and that your office may be good at doing constituent services, but like we can do better than that. But that's a different thing than term limit.
It is, but it's it's a similar conversation, because in the end, it's like the counter argument to that is, shouldn't voters be smart enough to just realize that this is, that's not the person they should be electing?
Yeah, no. Although I think it applies more to senators than it does to congressmen, because 2 years is time to figure that out, right? But like 6 years, true. There's a lot of decline that can happen to somebody in 6 years. And
that's clearly where we've seen it as well. And that's a good point. Looking at wins, I'm curious what your I know we've gone probably well over time, but we always have interesting things to talk about. One of the benefits in my mind of passing the recent CR, Mike Johnson took some political heat for that. He knew he was going to have to do it. But it gave us space to what I think is the ability to negotiate sort of a grand bargain here on border security, where Biden has effectively signaled his desire to do so by proposing a supplemental package that includes $14 billion for the border, a pretty large number, $60 billion for Ukraine, and of course money for Israel. And what's funny is that the difference in the conference between people like me and people and others who disagree with me, it's emblematic of all of the things we've been talking about. So I see this as an opportunity to get meaningful border security policy reforms. Everything we want, probably not, but I definitely see it as an opportunity where deals are made when both sides want the other thing more than the other side wants it. Just by definition, that's how a deal is made. And for right or wrong reasons, probably wrong reasons, the Ukraine aid issue has considerably less favor with Republicans than it used to, considerably. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so with me, not so much, but with others, yes, I have some problems with it. But let's use that as leverage. Let's use that as leverage to actually get border policy reform. And yet, I still get pushback from some of the purists who are like, who want to separate these things, and I'm like, in what you're effectively saying is you really don't want border policy reform. Right. I don't see another outcome to your position. And now that tells me that you actually don't want to see it because it's too good of a political issue for you. And I didn't even believe that about most politicians. I definitely believe that about the outside groups that advocate for, pro-immigration or anti-immigration. Mm-hmm. I think they never want a deal made that would secure the border because it takes away their main purpose for being and their main way of profit seeking. So what do you make of that? Do you think we have a chance of it? I think Democrats secretly want it, some border policy reform, because it'd be good for them and make it for them to blame it on us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and look, I mean, in a perfect world, people that be up and down votes on all sorts of things, and and it's difficult for me to get to pound my shoe on the desk about this, because I'd actually vote for all those things, right? I'd vote for the border thing. I'd vote for aid to Ukraine. I'd vote for aid to Israel. And if the only way you can get all three of those things is by voting for all three of those things together, that would not be a hard choice for me. Then again, I'm not voting for any of this stuff, right? But this gets to my, to the thing that we've been talking about a bunch here is this desire to make the perfect the enemy of the good, right? Is that better to have a total loss where you proved your purity and willing to fight to the bitter end than to have a partial victory? And look, we have a lot of problems in this country that come from both parties getting too many partial victories. That's one of the reasons why we're spending too much money and why the debt's so big, is that, the people who want a big defense, spending, which I'm in favor of. Part of the deal was bigger entitlement spending, right? It was guns and butter. We'll just do both and that was sustainable for a long time when we had robust economic growth in this country. It's less sustainable now, and so there are hard choices that are eventually going to have to be made. But at the same time, this is normal, healthy politics, is everybody getting 60-70% of a loaf. And and it gets us back to this incentive problem where people would rather get zero loaf and say, I stood up to these guys and said no when they were going to sell us out. And I don't think people are getting sold out. I think that people are trying to actually make choices about what is possible. And that's what they're being sent to Washington to do, right? I mean, that's what they're supposed to be sent to Washington to do. But a lot of them are sent to Washington to go on, weird YouTube shows and talk about how, they refuse to get along, and kowtow to this establishment that basically, doesn't really exist. If these powers that be that these people are so courageously fighting existed, again, going back to your point earlier, how come the powers that be haven't stopped them, right? I mean, it's like one of these things I always used to say to the left in the Bush years. You think the CIA is this incredibly powerful, the military national security state is this incredibly powerful thing where, Jason Bourne can just say the word Blackbriar into a cell phone and squads of cars show up in downtown London 5 minutes later, right? And yet none of the people going after George Bush have been assassinated, none of these people have been thrown, into prison or anything like that. It's because they're not actually as powerful as you think they are. There's this thing that came out of TikTok or Instagram called main character syndrome, which I think fuels a lot of sort of the populist mood right now, where people think that they are actually at the center of these major mythic narratives in our lives. And that way they need to think to make that sustainable, they have to think that the forces that they're arrayed against are incredibly powerful and that they're incredibly brave for challenging them, when in fact, the powers that be don't know who most of these people are, don't give a rat's ass about them. Or it turns out, this is one of the lessons I try to tell when people ask me, what is something about Washington that, most people in the rest of America don't really understand. And one of the first things I'll always say is nobody's running anything. Like this idea that there is like, you finally get past one red rope or one last door in the opening of the Get Smart thing, right? And you'll find the people making all of the decisions, the Egg Council or whatever, and that they're, or the Pentaveret, and they're pulling all of the strings. That room doesn't exist. The donors don't run everything. Congress doesn't run everything. The White House doesn't run everything. Everybody is contending with everybody else to try and get the successes that they can and minimize their failures. And it is a chaotic, messy thing where people have to make bargains and make the least objectionable choices a lot of the time. But this idea that you can ever find, whether it's the Jews or any other group secretly running everything, is a fantasy. There is no, like, the conspiracies really aren't there. And that is something I think our lizard brains doesn't want to hear. We want to think that there are powerful forces out there running everything. And the founding fathers, they set up a system where that's pretty much impossible.
It is. And people ask me all the time, okay, if Joe Biden is in such decline, who's running things? And my answer is like, I don't know, maybe the chief of staff, just, at a very administrative level, but the real answer is kind of what you said. It's nobody, because that's just not how our government really works. Joe Biden doesn't, they're not having a meeting in the White House about all of these new EPA rules that are coming out, which, by the way, I think, maybe because that's the subcommittee that I work on often. Mm-hmm. One of the more dangerous things to American way of life is all these new rules coming out of the EPA that'll affect, what kind of plastics you can buy, what kind of gasoline, how many refineries will exist, even gas prices, ability to build pipelines to keep your home. I mean, there's just, the list goes on and on. It's extremely damaging. But who's really doing that? It's people Biden hired, people, activists that were hired into the administration. If you want to change these things, you need to win elections. If you want to win elections, you have to appear likable. People ask me for advice on if they're running for an elected seat for the first time. I say, look, you need to get as many people as possible to remember you and kind of like you, just kind of like you. They don't have to love you. It'd be great if they did, but kind of like you, but definitely remember you. And beating Democrats in this day and age is certainly not a hard thing. All the polling shows that generic Republicans are just trouncing Democrats in swing states. Right. And yet we still stand a chance of drastically losing, just because we hate winning sometimes. And I find this to be my main battlefront in politics these days, because out debating the left, I find to be easy. It's the easiest thing in the world, but we need our own side to allow us to do it, so that we can at least do what we said we were going to do and have some conservative wins, assuming that's the purpose, which should be the purpose of the party. I'll often tell people, or back in the day when I was in better standing, sorry for people who can hear this leaf blowing right behind me, I apologize. I can see him, but I can't hear him. So okay. Your mic setup is great.
The Republican Party should want more rhinos if the alternative is Democrats in those seats, right? So, like, people used to say Scott Brown, remember him? He was sort of a squishy, moderate Republican senator from Massachusetts, but he voted for the Senate Majority Leader, right? He voted for the Republicans. He added a vote on a lot of Republican things to move legislation. Was he as conservative as I would want? No, but the alternative is Elizabeth Warren, right? And so, like, the people who say we need to purge the party of all of these rhino squishes, right? They're the ones who want the Republican Party to be a minority party, because by the nature of coalitions and the way they work, the difference between being a majority coalition and a minority coalition are the least committed members, right? Are the ones who can win in majority Democratic districts, or at least purplish districts and that kind of thing. And if you treat all of them like traitors and sellouts, you're just guaranteeing that it's going to be harder to move legislation when you're in control of the House or the Senate. And so that doesn't mean I want, like, squishy moderates necessarily to be running the place or to be the center of gravity of the Republican Party, but you want grownups who like winning. And the way you win, have enduring wins, is by being a serious majority party. And the nature of the bases of both parties really aren't interested in doing that. They're not interested in being 60% parties. They want to be 51% or 50.1% parties at most and be as pure as possible and impose outcomes on the other side, because that's the best way to drink their tears. And I just don't think that's a grown-up way to do politics.
Leftist tears.
There you go.
It's good. It's fun. I have about 1,000 mugs because I get them from every event I go to. I get a mug, and so this happens to be the one. I think the conspiracy talk is interesting, because you mentioned like the sort of the paranoia of the security state from the left and the Bush era, and what's fascinating to me is how that's transitioned almost entirely to the right recently, and with a very severe strand of isolationism. Populism is a feeling for sure. You've written that. I agree with that. But those feelings have come with them a couple distinguishable policy platforms, and one of them is definitely isolationism. Like just keep out of any affairs in the world. It doesn't help us, and to me that's a very dangerous and naive, at best naive, at worst dangerous philosophy. Naive because it assumes that we live in the 15th century where things were truly far away and not interconnected. But that opinion hasn't really been valid for a few centuries, to be honest. I mean, even in our own revolution, the French thought that it was in their self-interest to help us across the Atlantic. Why? Do you think they're just stupid? Do you think that they were just a bunch of morons or globalists? Like, no, it was in their self-interest to see Britain defeated. Just like it's in our self-interest to see Russia defeated, because if they're not, then the Chinese take a signal from that and they want to take Taiwan. And there's a global economy at stake that we benefit from greatly. People don't appreciate that over the last 70 years. And so these conspiracies have metastasized into some very odd things. I came across an Instagram profile the other day that mostly talks about underground tunnels, I think beneath New York, where thousands and thousands of children are kidnapped and captured. Like, I mean, and these are serious, articulate people talking about this. I mean, they're definitely crazy but they're articulate. Like they're not.
Yeah.
They can go order coffee and like have a job and operate in society, but and yet believe these things. And like, I'm always curious what like the psychological underpinnings of this are, like the desire to believe in such things. And so you've got candidates now running for Congress that are like, abolish the FBI. And I'm like, the FBI ain't perfect, and we've caught them doing some screwed up things, but we've also can identify the individuals who have done the screwed up things, and certainly identify reforms that might be necessary. Like that's a reasonable way to attack that problem. But you want to abolish the entire federal law enforcement apparatus? I mean, really? Are we just? And this is it's a diffusion of responsibility. And some when a candidate for Congress is saying that, I think it speaks to a diffusion of responsibility. I don't think I can't imagine they truly believe it. But it lends credibility to a growing number of people who do. And whether it's QAnon or not, I mean, QAnon people didn't go away. The QAnon movement disappeared, but people who are susceptible to those beliefs they're still people, and they're still making comments online and coming up with new issues. And it's such a distraction for us in Congress, who are trying to do serious things. Like I mentioned before, you got to battle the EPA. You want to talk about your way of life being threatened? The EPA is threatening your way of life in a very, very serious way. And it's such a distraction when we get hung up on, I think, very, very, very silly conspiratorial things. And the Ukraine stuff has been mind blowing. And you've got pundits like Tucker Carlson, who I obviously openly despise. I say it all the time, mostly because of his very personalized attacks on me and my wounds. He went far worse than Pete Davidson ever did, just because he disagrees with me on the Ukraine issue. And what I've always hated about pundits like that is they lend themselves to the conspiracies by saying, well, why can't we ask questions about the biolabs in Ukraine? Why can't we ask the questions? Well, I don't know. Why can't you also answer the questions? Right. Why don't you have a responsibility to use your vast network of researchers and fact finders and actually answer the question to your viewers? And unfortunately, the incentives just aren't there because it's entertainment over knowledge.
So that's sort of at the very beginning of this, I talked about how I think that the anti-Semitism stuff is was overdetermined. There are a lot of currents feeding into this river kind of thing. The role of entertainment is now just a huge one. This was a big part of my point in my book Suicide of the West, is that more and more people are following politics as if it's a form of entertainment. And when you follow things as a form of entertainment, you're really just rooting for the hero to win and the villains to lose. And we forgive all sorts of things in movies and TV shows that we would never forgive in real life. I mean, heroes murder people, they torture people, they punch them in the face just for fun, whatever. Oh, it's great, it's a movie, it's fun, whatever. I like Harrison Ford, whatever. But you wouldn't tolerate that in the real world. We kind of suspend our disbelief about the moral rules of the extended order when we follow things like entertainment. And that's why we can root for, I remember the first WWE wrestling match I ever went to, they spent 20 minutes trying to get an ice pick away from the Iron Sheik because he was going to kill Sergeant Slaughter, right? We want to believe that stuff is real. But when you want to believe that stuff is real about politics, you start believing this QAnon type stuff. You reduce things down to narratives that are actually tied to facts. And I think our expectations of politics become warped and really sort of deranged as a result, or they can be. And this is a problem for the left, and it's a problem for the right because it's an American problem. We're getting so much of our stuff through screens where we're not actually participating in things. We're treating other people as abstractions. We're listening to people like Tucker who want to tell us that there are these vast unseen forces manipulating their lives, and they're the brave ones to question it. And that fuels a sense of paranoia. And the weird thing, one of the terrible downsides of the internet and social media has been the ability of people with weird views to find community with other people. And I'd say weird in the most innocuous term possible. The analogy I often use, which I'm not calling these people pedophiles, right? But like 100 years ago, 50 years ago, if you were some pedophile, it was really hard to meet other pedophiles, right? It's a hard conversation to start, at the park or whatever. Now, whatever your weird view is, you can find 50, 100 people who share it. And the way our brains are wired is that 50 or 100 people feels like thousands, feels like millions to us, right? We think if we get 200 likes on a Twitter post, we think, oh, America is with me. When in fact, it's like half of them are bots and the other half are fellow weirdos or anti-Semites or whatever. And so the ability for mass social media communication to reinforce and comfort people who want to be their worst selves and perpetuate the most deranged stuff is a real problem. And I don't know how you deal with it, but it's a real 7%. Problem.
Yeah. It's the 7%. The 7% who actively do it. And then, our problem is that folks who might be susceptible to it. And I think our battle is helping them understand that 7% does not have their best interest in mind and that they shouldn't be listened to. And I think one of the key things you said there was a propensity towards single variable analysis. Mm-hmm. That is a major downfall of American politics. Yes. For both the left and the right. It's like, the left is crazy about it, right? It's like everything is basically global climate change. Right. Climate change or racism. Pick everything is an outcome of those two things. And the more we get to this idea that, okay, your problems have a single variable that can be attacked, whether it's the deep state or whatever it is, it's dangerous to just analytical thinking and proper decision making.
Right.
And
it also lets you demonize people who disagree with you. Oh, they must be in on it, right? If everybody who disagrees with me is actually a member of Hydra, then it gives me permission to treat them as like public enemies, and like that's why I thought Donald Trump's statement where he says that the threats from abroad pale in significance to the threats from within and the vermin and all of that kind of stuff. I don't like his use of the word vermin. The part of that formulation that really bothers me is the threats from abroad pale in comparison to the threats from within, because that is turning people who disagree with you about politics into existential foes who want to overthrow, the country and kill you and all that kind of stuff. And that's I'm not saying that there aren't bad people domestically that need to be dealt with, but like that's why we have law enforcement. And to treat people that are your political opponents as your existential enemies from the right or from the left is really, really dangerous. And it's not something that responsible politicians are supposed to do.
No, I also hit the false choice there. It's like because
Right.
it's people are like, well, like there's legitimate questions to ask. Why can we support Ukraine's border and Israel's border but not our own border? That's a legitimate question to ask, but it's also a false choice. You can do both. And you can be a leader in the world and understand the benefits of that while also understanding that there's definitely problems within that you need to address.
Sure. Yeah.
But I know you got to go, Jonah. And I know I kept you way longer, and I appreciate it because it was a good conversation.
Yeah, glad to do it. Happy to come back. I got to have you on my pod at some point. It's great to see you.
Yeah, let's do it soon as you want. Make it happen.
Cool.